At my dad's birthday party, my name tag said the disappointment. My stepmom laughed. Well, it's true. So I stood up, clinked my glass, and said, I'd like to make a toast to the last time you'll ever see me. Dad choked, but the real shock came when I walked out the door and left behind one final. I'm 32 female, and if you ask my dad, he'd probably tell you I'm his biggest disappointment. Not because I'm in trouble with the law, not because I'm jobless, not because I've done anything actually bad, but because I chose to live my life on my own terms instead of following his plan for me. My dad, James, is the kind of man who likes things his way. He has always been big on control, appearances, and most of all, family loyalty as long as that loyalty benefits him. When my parents divorced, I was 10. It wasn't an ugly divorce, at least not outwardly, but my dad moved on fast. Within a year, he was remarried to Stephanie, a woman who had 2 kids from her previous marriage, Hunter and Olivia. And that's when everything started to change. At first, I really tried. I was just a kid, and I wanted my dad to be happy. Stephanie was nice, in that fake, sweet kind of way, overly enthusiastic in public, always making a show of how she was trying to blend the family. She'd hug me a little too tightly and say things like, I just know we're going to be best friends. But behind closed doors, it became pretty clear that she only had one priority, her own kids. My dad, who had always been involved in my life before, suddenly had new priorities. He went from being my dad to being their dad. It was small things at first, like missing my soccer games but never missing Hunter's, forgetting to pick me up from school but always being on time for Olivia's dance recitals. Then it escalated. By the time I was 14, I was expected to babysit them, help with chores that they never had to do, and act like a good big sister while they got away with everything. If I ever complained, my dad would sigh, like I was exhausting him, and tell me, they need more attention, you're older, be mature. Stephanie, on the other hand, had a more direct approach. She just called me selfish. The final straw was when my dad drained the savings account my mom had set up for me, money that was supposed to be for my college tuition. My mom fought hard in court to get that money back, but by then the damage was done. I was furious. I barely spoke to him my last year of high school, and when I left for college, which I paid for on my own, I only came back for the occasional holiday. Years passed, and my relationship with him never really recovered. I still got invites to family events, but they always felt more like an obligation than a real effort to see me. I could tell that to my dad and Stephanie, I was just the difficult child who refused to play happy family. Hunter and Olivia, on the other hand, were the golden children. Which brings me to my dad's birthday party. Stephanie was throwing a huge party for him. One of those over-the-top, invite everyone we ever met kind of things. I wasn't planning on going, but my aunt, one of the few family members still on my side, convinced me. Just stop by for a little while, she said. Maybe things have changed. Spoiler, they hadn't. The moment I walked in, I felt that familiar, unwelcome tension. People I hadn't seen in years were there, but instead of warm greetings, I got polite nods. Conversations flowed around me, but no one really included me. I saw my dad across the room, laughing with some old friends, but when his eyes landed on me, his smile flickered for a half second, like he was surprised I actually showed up. I was already regretting coming when I noticed a small table near the entrance. It had name tags. Stephanie had done this before at past events, claiming it helped people mingle. It was her thing. Most of the tags were normal. Uncle Mark, Cousin Rachel, Neighbor Tom. And then I saw mine. And I froze. because my name tag didn't just say my name. It said something else. Something that made my stomach turn. I picked it up, staring at it. And from across the room, I heard a familiar laugh. Steph. She was watching me, a wine glass in hand, an amused little smirk on her face. I clenched the name tag in my fingers, heat rising in my chest. This was not going to go the way she thought it would. I stood there for a moment, gripping the name tag between my fingers, my brain taking an extra second to process what I was looking at. It had my name, but underneath, in smaller letters, someone had written, "The Disappointment." At first, I thought maybe it was some kind of joke, some awful, tasteless joke. Maybe a cousin trying to be funny, maybe an unfortunate mix-up. But then I heard her laugh. Stephanie. I looked up and found her across the room, standing near the bar, sipping her wine like she didn't have a care in the world. Our eyes met, and that slow, satisfied smirk spread across her face. I could feel my pulse in my ears. A few people had noticed me standing there now, a couple of glances in my direction. No one said anything, but I could feel the weight of it, the expectation. I could almost hear the words they weren't saying. "Don't make a scene." I took a slow breath and put the name tag back down on the table. I smoothed it out, aligning it perfectly with the others. For a second, I almost laughed. Of course she did something like this. This was classic Stephanie. Not an outright insult, not something blatant enough for people to immediately call her out on, but something just subtle enough that if I reacted, I'd look like the problem. I should have known the second I walked through the door that something like this was coming. A hand touched my shoulder, and I turned to see my aunt, the only person in this family who had ever really understood me. Her brows were drawn together, her lips pressed into a tight line. She'd seen the name tag. Her eyes flickered toward Stephanie. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. I forced a tight smile. "Yeah," I said. "I'm fine." But I wasn't. I was exhausted. Exhausted in a way that I didn't even know how to describe. Because this wasn't new. This wasn't even the worst thing she'd done. This was just the latest in a long, long pattern of making sure I always knew my place.
I should have walked out right then. I should have turned around and left. But something in me said, no, not this time. So instead, I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and did something that I knew would catch them off guard. I smiled. A real easy smile, like nothing had happened at all. Then I picked up a glass of champagne from a passing server, clinked it lightly with my nail, and turned toward the room. Because if Stephanie wanted a show, I was going to give her one. I raised my glass just slightly, feeling the weight of the room shift as a few people glanced in my direction. I hadn't made a scene, not yet, but the quiet clink of my nail against the glass had drawn just enough attention, just enough to make Stephanie hesitate for a fraction of a second before taking another slow sip of her wine, her eyes narrowing slightly, like she was trying to figure out what I was doing. I let the moment stretch just a little longer than necessary, like I was considering making a toast, before I gave a small shake of my head and turned away, heading deeper into the party. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of reacting. Not yet. The party itself was exactly what I expected. Crowded, overly polished, with expensive catering and carefully curated decorations. Stephanie had gone all out, as she always did, because everything in her life had to be a performance. It wasn't just about celebrating my dad's birthday. It was about showing off, about making sure people knew how perfect her life was, how loved she and my father were, how successful their children had become. Their children, not me. Hunter and Olivia were already holding court in the middle of the room, surrounded by a small group of relatives who were all nodding along as Olivia gushed about her upcoming wedding. And of course, Dad's paying for everything, she was saying. flashing a smile as she twirled the massive diamond on her finger. We wanted something tasteful, you know, a real elegant wedding, not one of those tacky Pinterest disasters. I bit back a laugh. Olivia had always been like this, polished, rehearsed, just the right amount of self-absorbed to make sure everything revolved around her, without seeming too obvious about it. Then Hunter was leaning against the bar, nodding along as a few of my dad's old friends congratulated him on his new job, which I was certain he hadn't actually earned. Hunter had never worked for anything in his life. Every opportunity had been handed to him, every mistake quietly cleaned up by my father. I was halfway tempted to walk over and insert myself into the conversation, just to watch them squirm. But before I could, I heard my father's voice. "Ah," he said, and when I turned, he was already making his way toward me, a drink in hand, his expression carefully neutral. "I didn't think you were going to come." I smiled, but it wasn't a real smile. "Wouldn't miss it." He nodded, glancing at the room around us before looking back at me. "You've been keeping busy, I hear." There it was, the polite, careful way he avoided actually asking anything about my life, the same way he always did. I nodded. "Yeah, work's been good. I bought a house last year." His brow lifted slightly. "A house?" "Yup." He took a sip of his drink, not asking anything else. That was the thing about my dad. He hated when I did anything that made it impossible for him to see me as the failure he always thought I'd be. Every time I did something on my own, without his money or his help, it chipped away at the narrative he'd built around me, the one where I was lost and selfish and immature. He didn't like that. He much preferred the version of me he could shake his head at, the version he could talk about in pitying tones when people asked about me. I could feel him searching for something to say, some kind of subtle dig, but before he could, Stephanie's voice cut through the conversation like a knife. "Well," she said, stepping up beside him, her smile all teeth, "at least she finally did something responsible." And just like that, I felt the heat rise in my chest again. I turned to her, and she was beaming, like she was just so happy to see me. But I knew that look. I'd seen it 100 times before. Stephanie was the kind of person who could insult you to your face, and if you got upset, you were the problem. She was just joking. You were too sensitive. I should have walked away. I should have let it go, but I didn't. Because something about this night, about this whole thing, was sitting wrong with me. Maybe it was the name tag. Maybe it was the fact that my dad had barely spoken to me before finding a way to brush me off. Maybe it was the way the entire room was filled with people who had never really been my family. Whatever it was, I was done. I turned to Stephanie, tilting my head slightly. "You know," I said, voice light, "I was going to let it go, but I have to ask, whose idea was the name tag?" I saw the flicker of something cross her face, just for a split second. "Oh, come on," she said, laughing. "You always take things so personally. It was funny." I nodded. "Right. Hilarious." She shrugged, sipping her wine. "You know, if you spent less time being angry all the time, maybe you'd be—" I held up a finger, cutting her off. "Actually," I said, voice calm, "I think you're right." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "About what?" "About making a joke," I said, turning slightly, raising my glass. "Because now that I think about it, I have a joke too." She blinked, caught off guard. My father shifted uncomfortably beside her. And then I smiled. Slow, easy. "I'd like to make a toast." And just like that, the room started to go quiet. Not all at once, not immediately, but conversation started to die down as people turned toward me, curious. Because people love a toast, especially an unexpected one. I could feel my father tense beside me. Stephanie let out a small laugh, shifting her weight like she was trying to brush me off. "Oh, come on, you don't have to—" "No, really, I insist." The weight of the room shifted as more people turned toward me, curious murmurs rippling through the crowd. A few guests grabbed their drinks, ready to indulge in what they assumed was just a lighthearted toast. They had no idea what was coming. Stephanie's smile had tightened at the edges, but she was still playing it cool, still holding on to the idea that I was the same person she'd always known, the person who swallowed every insult, who let things slide, who never really fought back. My dad, on the other hand, wasn't so composed. He knew me better than she did. His grip on his glass tightened, and for the first time all evening he looked directly at me. Not through me, not around me, but at me. I let the silence stretch a little longer, letting the anticipation build before finally raising my glass. "To my father," I began, my voice light, almost conversational. "And to Stephanie, of course. Because without them, I don't think I would have learned one of the most valuable lessons of my life." I paused, taking a slow sip of my champagne. Stephanie let out a small, breathy laugh. "Oh boy, here we go." A few people chuckled. They thought this was banter. They thought I was about to say something self-deprecating, maybe poke fun at myself, smooth things over like I always did. I smiled. "No, really, I mean it. Because I think we often learn the most from the people who challenge us, don't you?" I turned my gaze to my father. "Dad, you always told me that family is supposed to build each other up, that we should support one another, celebrate each other's successes." My father's throat bobbed as he swallowed, his grip tightening on his drink. He didn't like where this was going. And I used to believe that. I really did. But then, somewhere along the way, I realized something. The room was almost completely silent now. Stephanie's fingers were curled so tightly around the stem of her wine glass that I half wondered if it would snap. I set my glass down gently on the table beside me. I realized that for some people, support only exists when you fit into the version of themselves they want you to be. That as long as you play the role they've written for you, whether it's the golden child or the black sheep, they'll keep you right where they need you. And if you step outside that role, well, that's when they show you how they really feel. I heard a few uneasy shifts in the crowd, people glancing at each other. Olivia looking at my father, waiting to see how he should feel before deciding how she should feel. I saw Hunter smirking like this was all just entertainment to him. And Stephanie, she was still smiling, but her knuckles were white. I used to think that if I just proved myself, if I worked hard, if I was successful, if I played by the rules, you'd see me differently. I said, my voice softer now but no less steady. But I get it now. It was never about me. It was never about what I did or didn't do. Stephanie opened her mouth, probably to cut me off, but I didn't let her. I turned my attention back to my dad. Because at the end of the day, I was never supposed to succeed, was I? His expression flickered, just for a second. I let that hang in the air before I exhaled, rolling my shoulders back. But I did. I built something for myself. I made a life that has nothing to do with this family. And let me tell you, it's been the most peaceful, fulfilling thing I've ever done.
I could see the questions forming on people's faces, the doubt, the curiosity, because they had no idea what I was talking about. I was done letting them believe the version of me that Stephanie and my father had carefully crafted over the years. Stephanie let out another forced laugh, trying to regain control of the room. "Oh, come on, this is ridiculous. It's just a name tag." I turned my gaze to her. "You're right," I said smoothly. It is. But it's also a pattern, a lifetime of moments just like this. Little digs, little jokes, little ways of reminding me that no matter what I do, in your eyes, I'll always be the disappointment. My father finally cleared his throat, stepping forward slightly. That's enough. I met his gaze head on. Oh, I agree, I said. It is enough. And then, before anyone could process what was happening, I picked up my glass again. I raised it slightly, letting the weight of my next words settle over the room. To the last time you'll ever see me. The silence was deafening. My father stiffened. Stephanie's jaw actually dropped slightly before she snapped it shut. Someone in the back muttered, "Wait, what?" And then, without another word, I set my glass down, turned on my heel, and walked toward the door. I could feel them watching me, could feel the panic starting to creep in, because this wasn't like the other times. I took one last glance back before stepping through the door. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was walking away from a fight. I was walking towards something, toward freedom, toward peace, toward the life I've been building, away from the drama that had always defined my family. As I stepped outside, I took a deep breath, the cool night air filling my lungs. It was over. I had cut ties in the way I should have years ago. There was no more pretending, no more trying to win approval from people who had never cared about me unless I fit the image of what I was supposed to be. I drove home that night in silence, feeling a weight lifting from my shoulders with every mile. But even as I sat in my quiet living room that evening, there was a part of me that couldn't help but wonder if I'd gone too far. Had I really done the right thing? Had I been too harsh? The next few days were a blur of texts and calls I didn't answer. I didn't look at social media because I knew it was full of the fallout. I had walked on my dad's birthday celebration. I had publicly humiliated him and Stephanie, his wife, my stepmother, who I had always felt was trying to push me aside in favor of her own perfect world. The family group chat was blowing up with messages, but I stayed silent, unsure if I could even face the confrontation that would follow. Finally, I got a text from my aunt, the only person who seemed to understand me, asking if I was okay. I didn't know what to say. I was okay, better than I'd been in years, but also a little unsure. I told her I needed time. She didn't press. My father called me the next morning. "Where are you?" he asked. In his familiar tone, the one that always sounded like